I know it's crazy, but hear me out, right?
Ladies, gentlemen, and those with the good sense to do away with the whole notion, I welcome you to the premier audio medium for all your Fazbear entertainment needs. The Freddy Fazbear Pizza Podcast. Note, FFPP is not responsible for any loss of appetite, disinterest, dismemberment, or other legally classified statuses. So strap in and enjoy.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Freddy Fazbear Pizza Podcast. I'm your host, the Toast, Rytoast, here to talk about Five Nights at Freddy's like we always do. It's another Oops All Questions episode because we're kind of like, we're in the lead up to Secret of the Mimic and Dead by Daylight and all this really big stuff happening. But like, until that happens, I don't know what to talk about, which is why like 2 of my last months of videos haven't been theories and they've just been like, oh, FNAF is a franchise and oh, here's my idea for a FNAF game. Dog, I don't know anymore. So we're doing questions. We're doing questions again, and hopefully it gets us some kind of idea for this week's video, maybe like the Elizabeth Afton did, or like the what would your take on a villain one be? Like, these have all been spawned from questions so far. And you know, maybe that'll happen again in conversation. We love a good brainstorming session. So we're gonna start right off the top. If you want your questions, before we get into it, almost forgot, if you want your questions answered on the podcast, feel free to send them into Freddy Fazbear Pizza Podcast at gmail.com. That is in the description to copy and paste because it's a pain to type out. But our first question comes from Isaiah, they. Since Ruin, people have been saying Glitchtrap and BurnTrap are the Mimic, but here's my issue with it and was wondering what you think. If Mimic is both, then wouldn't that mean everything since Help Wanted has been pointless? Like, it was clearly set up to be Afton for both since the beginning of Help Wanted, but now since Ruin, it's now the Mimic, not Afton. Let's be realistic here, where does the Mimic know how to control people and get what it wants? It wouldn't, but we know Afton in the games, books, and even the movie shows him controlling others for own reasons. Like, even if the Mimic was trained on only the first 4 games shown in Help Wanted, we never see or hear Afton controlling others in those games. I'm wondering what you think of this, since I'm a Glitchtrap/BurnTrap is Afton fan. Thank you for your question. No, it's a good point to bring up. This is one of the more contentious debates right now in the theory space, is how much of Glitchtrap/BurnTrap is William Afton and how much is the Mimic. I would say if it is the Mimic, it's not... then I wouldn't say everything since Help Wanted was for no reason, right? It just depends on how you're interpreting the stuff we have in front of us and how that informs the theories you make. Like a lot of folks have been saying, right now we're kind of listless on what to theorize for because we don't really have an inciting incident to solve around. That being said, as far as how much of Glitchtrap and BurnTrap is Afton and how much of Glitchtrap and BurnTrap is the Mimic, I think that really comes down to a few variables that you have to solve for, essentially. One of them you bring up, right? Why does the Mimic know how to manipulate and control people? Where's that coming from? Because the Mimic only can replicate what it's seen. So theoretically, if it is manipulating people, then it's learned those methods from somewhere. And I would say you are right if we're only taking in Help Wanted's dataset. But that isn't the only dataset the Mimic has been trained on, right? The program originated elsewhere. We're going to see in-game where the program originated. As far as the books go, the program originated from Edwin Murray sometime, apparently in 1979, but we'll see how much of the books carry over. But regardless, that Mimic program originated by Edwin and then was taken by Fazbear Entertainment. So if the Mimic was in Fazbear's hands, then I think it's completely likely to say that William Afton or Henry Emily or one of them had access to the Mimic, especially if they were trying to use the Mimic in Fazbear Technologies. So all this to say, if William Afton was trying to use the Mimic for Fazbear Technologies at some point, then the Mimic would have been trained off of William Afton just from interacting with him. Now, this is all to say, does the Mimic know all of the manipulation tactics it has from William Afton trying to manipulate it to be a Fazbear animatronic? No. There is very clearly missing time that we just don't know yet. There is some stretch of time after the creation of the Mimic and the next major events in Fazbear's that we just have no information on. And hopefully Secret of the Mimic is going to be here to help illuminate those mysteries. So as far as is William Afton BarBADroid or Glitchtrap, there are arguments for it, and we'll get there. But it can still be the Mimic while being influenced by William Afton, because the Mimic didn't start being trained on data during Help Wanted. It was uploaded to Help Wanted with an already created dataset, and it just was trained on what William Afton had done because of Help Wanted, right? So if it already knows William Afton and already knows some of his tactics from some mysterious point of time we don't have, then when we move on to Help Wanted, it's like, well, I know this William Afton character, and now it's being trained on all the horrible things that he did via Help Wanted. And then it's like, all right, well, I'll recreate that, and I know William, so I will just be William Afton now. So that's completely possible. And then that's where the William influence is coming from. However, right, that is not the only answer here. Like you say, there's a total possibility that Glitchtrap/BarBADroid is influenced by William Afton directly. Either his spirit has remained or his consciousness is within Help Wanted. There's a lot of ways to go about that. Especially if the programming that was scanned into... Especially if the pieces of technology that were scanned into Help Wanted were in any way infected by William Afton's agony. And, again, going back to William Afton interacting with the Mimic, if it was just like the Mimic's motherboard that got scanned in that added the program to the system, it is still completely likely that William Afton's agony was already on the Mimic. We don't know what happened there. Likewise, we don't know for sure what happened after the FNAF 6 fire. So as far as your point of William Afton directly being Glitchtrap or BarBADroid, we still don't know definitively what happens between FNAF 6 and Help Wanted. So is it possible that William Afton's spirit is infecting this program? It is possible. We just don't know yet. A lot of people think it to be both, that it is the Mimic 1 program that has been tainted or possessed or otherwise controlled by William Afton's spirit or remnant or agony or whatever have you. And then it's this combination of it's the Mimic guided by the possession of William Afton, which is why it's so driven to recreate William Afton's worst deeds. I think a point in that's favor is while Glitchtrap seems to be pretty manipulative and subtle in its doings, the Mimic seems so dangerous that it's willing to just immediately kill Cassie the second it sees her. Granted, the Mimic itself was doing a good job at mimicking Gregory to lure Cassie down there. So it is capable of that higher processing. It's not just a, I see something, I kill machine. But it is interesting, to say the least, that the Mimic seems so direct, whereas Glitchtrap seems so passive for the most part in its methods of capturing the minds of people. And a question I think always needs to be answered is why Helpy and fake Gregory have conversations in Ruin, right? It's something that had always bugged me, especially during the Monty Walkways segment where the MXES entity gets locked away for a brief time. And Helpy comes up and goes, don't worry, I locked it away. And fake Gregory comes on the intercom and goes, you only did it because I helped you do it, or whatever. Something along those lines. So they're having an argument, which, again, some people just say the Mimic is trying to manipulate Cassie, so it's trying to make it seem like Cassie has multiple allies. So it's arguing with itself here. That is possible. I think it's unlikely. I don't know if the Mimic would think it necessary to play multiple characters just to convince Cassie even further of this whole ruse. I think it's more likely that Helpy and the Mimic, the physical Mimic, are two different instances of this Mimic program. Helpy is the digital one that does not have a body, and the one we hear on the walkie-talkie is the physical one that's locked away in the room. So then the question is like, okay, well then who's who? And this is going into Mimic iterations that I've talked about a lot, where like Glitchtrap seems to be iterating itself into the minds of its servants, whereas Vanny is Glitchtrap, but a different, newer version of Glitchtrap. Glitchtrap Prime is still just that face that appears on monitors and the like. So I think it is possible, and I have been going back and forth the idea that the Mimic 1 endoskeleton just gets taken over by the version of the Mimic 1 program that was in Gregory's mind. Right after Gregory is freed, it then moves on to there, which would then explain why it's so well trained on Gregory and his speech and mannerisms, because the Mimic 1 program was iterated within Gregory, got that data set, and then was inputted into, well, the Mimic, the physical Mimic. So that's, totally possible. And then the one that's in the mask would be Vanny. So it would be Vanny and Dr. Rabbit bickering, which is something that seems to happen looking into the books and the therapy logs, right? So I kind of went on a huge tangent here, but it kind of goes to show you that these Mimic personalities can be affected by the people they've been trained off of and the people they've come into contact with. So if it is the Mimic, it still very well can be influenced and taking over the personality of William Afton based on previous experiences it had in this mystery era between 1979 and whenever the Mimic is locked away. We have no information there. Hopefully Secret of the Mimic gives us some. So that could be part of it. And who knows, maybe William Afton saw this as a backup for immortality. If I can't live on forever, I can make my mind live on forever. And maybe William Afton literally took the Mimic and went, I'm going to make you another me in case this fleshy body ever fails. Like total Cave Johnson style, right? That is totally possible, and maybe that's what we see in Secret of the Mimic. Maybe that's what this week's video is going to be, is that the Secret of the Mimic is going to reveal that William Afton had a backup this whole time, and that's why the Mimic is so gung-ho on recreating what William Afton did, is because its purpose given to it by William Afton was, if my fleshy body fails, yours will prevail. And I really like that, so maybe that's what I'm going with. But yeah, I guess that's kind of a long-winded answer for a relatively brief question. But I guess my answer to you in this weirdness is, even if William Afton's Remnant and Agony are completely off the table, which I kind of hope they are, the Mimic is still so linked to Afton that nothing is wasted, right? Nothing is pointless at this point. That's mainly because we don't know what the Mimic was learning before Help Wanted. Help Wanted just caught it up to speed, essentially. But thank you for your question. Our next one comes from Dan, he, him. I found something while playing Help Wanted that I never saw someone talk about, and it's a text on the Sodaroni can that reads, "Since 1986. Then I remembered in Into the Pit, the game, which takes place in 1985, Oswald mentions a pizza-flavored soda in the vending machine, which I believe is Sodaroni, because it's like pepperoni. Can that be proof the idea that Agony created the pizzaplex the pizza place instead of time travel, or is it a little Easter egg? I have absolutely no idea." Thank you for your question. That is a great find. First of all, I completely forgot that Sodaroni says from 1986, which is a huge, that's a date. We don't get those often. That should be more important and more well-known. I didn't even think about that. But to your question, the fact that in Into the Pit, the game, when you're in 1985, you get that hint towards Sodaroni, I wouldn't want to say it's proof that the pizza place is an Agony manifestation. It is good evidence for it, but at the same time, the problem with using very specific and niche details in Into the Pit, the game, is that Into the Pit, the game, is also a love letter to Five Nights at Freddy's in general, and in that, there are a lot, and I mean a lot, of Easter eggs that just don't make any logical sense. A perfect example is when you're in the past, in that first moment when you're looking at all the arcade games, you keep mentioning that there are high scores with GGY written on it. Ain't no way Gregory was in 1985 getting those arcade machines. That's definitely an Easter egg, right? That is definitely a reference. Or the fact that when you're in Oswald's room, very rarely, the poster can turn into the cover for the Twisted Ones. did his poster turn into the Twisted Ones? Is this evidence that the novels are real in the game? No, that's an Easter egg. Very clearly an Easter egg. So one of the problems with trying to use Into the Pit as a tool for theorizing, and it's a problem that many people have talked about, and myself included have ran into, is you always have to ask the question, is this important lore, or is it a random Easter egg? And I think the best way to tell is how much emphasis the game itself puts on it, which is a subjective question, which is why this is still like a hot debate. But a perfect example of like how much the game gives emphasis, I would say, is the other Fazbear Frights minigames, right? The secret Count the Ways minigame, the secret To Be Beautiful minigame, the secret Fetch minigame, and even the hat secret in the hat collecting minigame where you can go off screen and the purple guy is dangling that sixth hat and drops it. These are things you have to go out of your way to do. They are secrets to be found, and they are playable full minigames. Versus something like GGY and something like pizza flavored soda, which are very quick text boxes. You just walk up, you get it, and you walk past. I think that is the main difference, and the way I look at Into the Pit in deciding what is an Easter egg and what is just a and what is like meaningful lore. And again, that is subjective. That is a very subjective answer, because some things, like the poster in the bedroom that turns into the Twisted Ones, you could argue waiting around in that bedroom until that Easter egg happens and enter, exit, and trying to force it, that's effort, meaning the game put emphasis on it, which is technically true, but I would think a rare chance is, if not more indicative of an Easter egg, because it's something they directly didn't want everybody to see. But then, the counter evidence to that is the death minigames from FNAF 2. Those are literally just a rare chance that can randomly happen, but they're clearly very important to the lore. So there's a lot of ways to look at it. The ways that I look at it is if something doesn't make sense or it's very easy to get, it's probably an Easter egg. Whereas if the game itself is emphasizing it as important, that's probably direct lore. So then to your question, the Sodaroni reference in Into the Pit. As much as I would like it to be hard evidence that the pizza place is an agony manifestation, another layer to add on top is, why would an agony manifestation include Sodaroni and also an erroneous date for Sodaroni, right? So I think it makes the most sense that Sodaroni reference is just an Easter egg reference, not direct lore saying that this can't be true, but just a reference being like, haha, remember Sodaroni? But that's my opinion. I think it's completely valid to take it either way, but even if you do take it as evidence against the pizza place being real time travel, I wouldn't make it your key piece of evidence. That's one of those things that, like, when making theories, there's key evidence and supporting evidence, where, like, key evidence is something that's really hard to dispute, it feels really solid, and it narratively fits well with your theory. And then supporting evidence is stuff that, while isn't majorly compelling, you can pile on to make it nice, right? It's the sprinkles to your ice cream. So if you were arguing that Into the Pit is just an agony manifestation and not real time travel, your ice cream can be all of the inconsistencies, where the Pit Bonnie is this weird monstrosity that doesn't make any logical or biological sense. You can point out the inconsistencies in the books on when you travel it and how that feels. And then the sprinkles on top are your supporting evidence. That's the Sodaroni reference, the GGY reference, things that don't really make sense, but on their own don't really back your theory. So that would be my advice to you, is that with the Sodaroni thing, if you want to use it as evidence that it's not time travel, use it as supporting evidence, but I think more than likely it's just an Easter egg. But thank you for your question. Our next question comes from Blake, he, him. I was looking online at some FNAF books when I came across a listing for a new series that hasn't been announced to my knowledge. It is called Five Nights at Freddy's Secret Artifacts, Confidential Evidence from the Archives of Fazbear Entertainment, Inc. What a title, right? This was a surprise to me, and I wanted to know your opinion on it. Do you think it's real? And if so, what kinds of things do you think will be in it? I'm thinking it's going to be info about the time between Springlocking of William Afton and FNAF 3. I don't think it can be past FNAF 6 because the title says Inc., not LLC. Thank you for your question. I think a couple things about this, but I think to be most useful to you guys, I pulled up the Freddy Fazbear Pizza fandom wiki page, which has a wiki page for this listing. So I want to go through what this listing is, the context around it, and the summary that's on the page, and then we'll talk about it. So, according to the wiki page, on November 20th, 2024, this book was revealed on Book Manager, set for an October 7th, 2025 release. In January of 2025, a placeholder cover was revealed on Edelweiss. A few months later, in March, the book was delayed to March 6, 2026. It still has not been formally announced as a real book. Some more trivia is that Secret Artifacts was first revealed on Scholastic's New Zealand trade list in October 2024, but it was under the title Five Nights at Freddy's Ology. So it seems like it's going to be a one of those guidebooks that just has just a listing of a whole bunch of stuff. Now, if it's like physical artifacts, quote unquote, like pictures and stuff like that, this would be an incredibly useful book, especially for content creators. But to be fair, if we're talking about this book as like a condensed, hey, here's a bunch of lore for you guys, really bad track record for those kinds of books. Usually pretty bad, pretty inaccurate. Regardless, let me go through the summary of this book that is listed on the wiki from Book Manager and Edelweiss. This companion book is the ultimate gift for any Five Nights at Freddy's fan. This in-world collection of novelty elements straight from the archives of Fazbear Entertainment is the closest thing fans can get to actually setting foot inside of Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria. Mysterious things have happened in the walls of Freddy Fazbear's restaurants for decades. This collection of artifacts, gathered from the shadows by the employees of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, Circus Baby's Entertainment and Rental, and Freddy Fazbear's Mega Pizzaplex, serve as a record of these events. Each relic tells a story, a testament to the strange and terrible events that occurred here, including fold-out blueprints of animatronics, Polaroids, arcade tickets, and much more. This one-of-a-kind novelty book is a must-have for Freddy's fans. Looking into this, if this is real, I am incredibly excited for it, because it seems like it's less of a guidebook. I know I just said it's one of those, but like, hear me out. It's less of a guidebook in the sense that, you know, it's, oh, FNAF 3 had this, this, and this. It's an in-universe book, according to this summary. So it more so seems like kind of closer to the interactive logbook, which is huge for the lore. We're still debating that to this day. So if that's something like this, I'm much more interested, especially if it's just a collection of in real life artifacts, quote unquote, right? Like blueprints of animatronics, always incredibly useful. Arcade tickets, they might have dates on them. There's so much stuff that this could be. So if that's what we're looking for, this is going to be if it's even half the book the logbook is, we're going to get some good answers from this book. So I'm very excited for it. If it is real, it seems like it is because it's on Book Manager and Edelweiss. So hopefully it is. Is it Edelweiss? It's probably German, right? Edelweiss? I don't know. You know, let me know in the comments. I have no idea. As far as when it takes place, you're right to point out that's Fazbear Entertainment Inc. and not LLC. That being said, no, by the time of the Pizzaplex, it's still LLC because it says so on the Balloon World arcade machine. Yeah, it would have to be no, it can't be pre-FNAF 6 because that's summary. I assume you didn't have the summary available to you, but the summary mentions the Pizzaplex in it. So I guess it's a modern day book, and it's talking about just the history of Fazbear at large, where it has technically been incorporated longer than it's been in LLC. No, that's really interesting. I hope it's real because it sounds like a really useful book. But thank you for your question, and thank you for the lookout. I didn't know this existed until you sent this in. Our next question comes from Calf Bean, I've got a question about the children's drawings in FNAF 2, which I've attached above. I'm not going to show it to you guys, but it's the FNAF 2 children's drawings. All of these drawings say My Day at the new Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, which implies they all come from the 87 location. Some of these drawings include one with Golden Freddy, one with Withered Chica, and one with 3 masks that are definitely the original gang instead of the toys. I think this might suggest that the original animatronics were attractions at the 87 location for at least some stretch of time, which could majorly change how we view what happened at this location. Do you have any thoughts on this? No, that's a really good call out. It's something that I hadn't really thought about until you pointed it out. As far as corroborating evidence, it does say in the week before, and forgive me, I'm going to misquote here. I'm remembering the gist of what is said. But in the week before, Ralph points out that they tried to kind of upgrade and retrofit the originals for the FNAF 2 location, and it didn't work, so they just went with the toys instead. So I do wonder if that's what this is talking about, where like there was a time period where it was just they took the original animatronics and tried to like cutify them, and that didn't work. So they're like, so then after people weren't liking it, they shelved the old ones, took pieces from them, and made the toys, which is super possible and still fits in the timeline we know. As far as what you said about how this affects what we know about what happened here, pretty much every theory assumes that FNAF 2 was made with the toys in mind. And this could suggest otherwise. This could suggest that it was made with the originals in mind and it was going to retrofit them. And when people weren't buying it, then the toys were made as like a last second thing. Which I think is possible. It's a weird timeline if so, though, because the toys, one of the weirdest timelines about Five Nights at Freddy's is the original Freddy's animatronics are like the least technologically advanced ones ever of the entire series, yet somehow they're the sturdiest and the most reliable, and also took the longest to build. Whereas something like the toys, which are more high-tech, if this timeline is true, were built in like a month tops. Or the Fun Times were built earlier than the toys, possibly, and they're way more advanced than anything we've seen. So technology never really lined up well with timelines, so I wouldn't use the timeline as evidence against the idea that the toys were made later into the life of the FNAF 2 location, but something to keep in mind in general when talking about how long the FNAF 2 location was around is that we know for a fact a few short weeks. We know for a fact in the newspaper, it says even though it was open for a few short weeks, it's already shutting its doors. So to me, it's not even it takes a month to build them. A few short weeks is like a month tops. So if they started with the originals, didn't like it, and then they swapped to the toys, it feels like that doesn't line up. So I think putting all of this together, our most likely timeline is the FNAF 2 location opened with both the originals and the toys. But eventually, kids preferred the toys, so the originals were retired and put in that back room. And that was after, like, maybe 2 weeks of being open, and then, FNAF 2, the game starts. That being said, both of these points go against what FNAF 2 itself says, when in the phone call, it's that they kept them around for spare parts, but they don't use them anymore. However, I guess it doesn't technically go. I'd have to reread it to be sure exactly, but if it did just say, like, we don't use them anymore, we just keep them around for spare parts, that could be relating to the current restaurant. That, like, they did use them, don't anymore, but we use them for spare parts for the toys, which are the moneymakers. But no, you're completely right to point that out. That's a really interesting detail I hadn't thought about. So I thank you for the question. The next question, a bit more of a content-focused one from Aiden, him. Using yours and other creators' theories to construct a FNAF timeline, to my belief, is hard, and I cannot develop a script I'm happy with. The evidence is rather solid, I have a couple things to back me up on each point, but I just can't find a good way to write it all down. How would you approach this issue? See, there's two ways to look at this. Do you want to write a academically satisfying script? Or do you want to write an academically satisfying essay, or do you want to write a narratively satisfying script? Because that's kind of the bind that you've put yourself in here. When writing this timeline and backing up evidence, it is academically most efficient to simply write out this timeline, and as evidence comes up, bring up the evidence that supports the points as you make them. But if you're talking about a cohesive, watchable piece of content of a timeline, then constantly breaking every point to be like, and then William Afton killed the missing children. And we know this from, and going over all of those, while it is informative, is less compelling as a piece. In my opinion. Anyway, this is all subjective, right? But if you're talking about just writing out a timeline in general, there's also a lot of information you have to condense somehow. As far as writing out a timeline in general, I actually was really a fan of the method I did, where I took a notebook and I wrote down each character and wrote down all the things they did, and then I went into a PowerPoint and I just went like time period by time period, mapping out everything that happens in each time period, and then that kind of formed the timeline. But if you're talking about like trying to make a watchable script for a timeline and something that feels good to watch, it is trickier. I think, it's a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation. I think there definitely is a way where you can sneak in the supporting evidence as you go. There's also the option of making 2 videos, There's the option of making both, where you make your timeline second, but first you make your kind of breakdown of your timeline, and you're like, oh, and I think this happens because of XYZ, I think this happens because of XYZ, and then the other video just being the timeline with a link at the beginning and the end being like, if you want my evidence for why I think this, check this other video. Again, it's not the best solution, but it's the only solution I can think of. And when I eventually make a timeline for this channel, it's probably what I'll do, where on 1 week I'll release my, hey, here's all my evidence for my timeline, and then the next Friday will be, here's the timeline itself. And you always want to release the evidence first. I know it's technically like it's going to spoil your timeline or whatever, but you want them at least uploaded at the same time. So when your timeline is up, there's always an available link to your evidence. Yeah, I mean, that's my thoughts on it. There's definitely a lot of different ways and a lot of different preferences, but that would be my advice, especially if you're trying to make like an algorithmically viable YouTube video. You want it to be narratively satisfying, because the worst thing your video can do for the algorithm is have people click off midway through. So just like you folks at home listening to this podcast, you haven't clicked off, right? Let's be honest, you're probably cooking or drawing or playing a video game and you have me on in the background, which honestly, same. That's what I do. I listen to podcasts all the time when I'm doing stuff like that. I'm always watching content, so totally understand. That's honestly why I watch live streams for, is all like, I'm going to start cooking, let me pull up a live stream so I have something to watch while I'm cooking. Anyway. Oh, and to the 14 people taking a shit, you got this. As far as making a compelling video that you're not going to click off of, it constantly including supporting evidence does hurt that, unfortunately. So it's a balance you're going to have to strike. But as far as for any actionable advice, write down everything. Ideally, I think a PowerPoint is a great way to contain that information. Decide what supporting evidence is good but not necessary to mention, and maybe section that off to a separate video, and decide what supporting evidence is necessary and maybe include that. But it's up to interpretation, it's up to preference, but I wish you luck. It's not easy. Our next question comes from Clawless, they them. I wanted to know your thoughts on the Gaslight District pilot, since you seem to really enjoy it based on the tweet you made. Aside from the obvious breadhead, feel free to say what you liked and what you didn't, or any predictions/theories you have. Well, thank you for your question. I loved it. It's probably my favorite indie animation pilot I've ever seen. I was just gripped by it. It felt like I was watching like peak Gorillaz music videos, but as like a narrative video. It's definitely my favorite thing Glitch has put out, and that's not to downplay anything Glitch has put out. It's more just showing the flowers for Gaslight District, because like, look, I love The Amazing Digital Circus. Amazing show. Can't wait for more of it. I haven't watched Murder Drones yet, but I've heard great things, and what I've seen from it is cool. But as far as like watching the pilot for Gaslight District, I was hooked. I watched it fully, watched it again, and then I've been like watching other people's reactions as an excuse to watch it again. Really loved it. I think it's the character design, it's the style and vibe of it more than anything is what I'm like I love so much. And the energy of it, the fast-pacedness of it. I love fast things. If that makes, I've got a very like monkey brain. If something is fast, I'm like, ooh. As far as like predictions or theories, it's one of those things that I'm really tempted to make theory content on non-horror games. And this is one of those things that I'm like, part of me really wants to make like a 40-minute video dissecting all of the lore that we've gotten so far and predicting where the show's going to go. But to be fair, as a pilot, it doesn't give us that much meat for where the show goes next. And I think that's on purpose, right? They want you to be like, well, what happens now? And they did that well, because part of me is like, I don't know where they go from there. It feels definitely like a premise rather than setting up what the continuing story is going to be. Because right now the continuing story just seems that it's going to be, well, got to keep a secret. And like, that's not super compelling. So there's definitely going to be like a story that arises here. This really feels like, here's the world, here's the characters, here's the premise, go, you know? And it stops at go. But yeah, that being said, as far as like the pilot itself, absolutely loved it. I could watch it 5 more times. I think I'm probably gonna watch it in another day or so, just because I really like how everything looks in it. Obviously the voice actors killed it. The sound design is awesome. The music is great. I keep thinking back to like the first 5 minutes of it. Just the style of the introduction of the Smiling Dead and them hunting down Jack, the cement song. You know, it's just so stylish in a really compelling way for me. And I also just like the vibe of like, you know, weird religiously trauma-coded post-apocalyptic gross horror. That's super up my alley. But yeah, I don't know what else to say. Thank you for your question. And possibly our last question, depending on how long this podcast is going for. Christina, she, her. I've had some people talk about this, but what do you think of the idea that, I've heard some people talk about this, but what do you think of the idea that Gregory plus Vanessa and Freddy probably are under the pizzaplex in ruin? When Gregory is talking to Cassie, he says it's been down here a really long time, which implies he's down there since he uses here. It's also much easier for him to communicate over the walkie-talkie when she's down there. Thank you for your question. Those are 2 points I hadn't really thought about. I had to double check. Actually, let me double check right now because I didn't double check the message. So yeah, I double checked and he does say it's been down here a really long time. You know, you raise good points. Part of it is like down here a really long time implies that Gregory's also there, but it's not just the writing quirk of it. The walkie-talkie finally gets through as deep as possible, which is weird because logically walkie-talkies work better when they are closer and have less things in between them. If Gregory's like at the main lobby of the security breach pizzaplex, how in the hell is his walkie-talkie reaching to the basement? Now, to be very fair, the walkie-talkie already reaches that distance at the beginning of the game. So these are incredibly strong walkie-talkies. But another thing to point out is after the fight begins, the mimic endoskeleton doesn't have a walkie-talkie anymore. So the Gregory that comes with the walkie-talkie after that is probably pretty believable, which makes me think that maybe if he's not downstairs, he just got to the pizzaplex and now was able to reach the walkie-talkie. But another very interesting point is the elevator intercom. It's something that's always been weird to me. Like, how's Gregory able to, like, hack into the weird intercom on this very mechanical elevator? Which I had been assuming. Now, here's my pet theory on why he's able to contact her here, no matter what. And that is that the hallways outside of the elevator are part of the old sister location bunker. I know it's crazy, but hear me out, right? So I'd been thinking that after the events of Security Breach, Gregory and Vanessa and Freddy's head are trying to figure out what has happened and look into it. Now let's map out the area, right? This sucks, but follow me. Pizzaplex, right? Confirmed FNAF 6 Pizzeria underneath it, right? FNAF 6 Pizzeria, heavily speculated and implied to be the original Fredbear's Family Diner that's been retrofitted by Henry. That Fredbear's Family Diner is electrically connected to the sister location bunker, so they can't be that far away, realistically. Especially if you think that Junior's is a bar that opened up in Fredbear's in between its time being Fredbear's and when Henry made it into FNAF 6. If so, then and you believe that Midnight Motorist is showing us the Afton household, then that would place the Afton house and Fredbear's very near each other, just like in the FNAF 4 day minigames where you can walk from your house to Fredbear's. Keep following me. We know the sister location bunker is under the FNAF 4 Afton family house, because you take an elevator and you end up in the FNAF 4 family Afton house, right? Like, it's a bunker connected to the house, especially because it also has power to the house and cameras to it as well. So, here's where it gets fucky. If the scooper whether it's the same scooper or not, is in the same room. Theoretically, when you escape the FNAF 6 pizzeria into the caves, you walk a good distance and then you end up at that scooper. This could be you walking underground from one bunker of a FNAF 6 to the other bunker of sister location. It is technically possible. We'd have to explain why it looks so visually different, but that could be the fact that in universe, sister location is a video game. So maybe that's Steve Snodgrass's interpretation of what he heard about the sister location bunker. It's possible, And if that's true, then I had a pet theory that I haven't really been too holded on to because I want more evidence for it. But it's possible that Gregory and Vanessa's hideaway and base of operations when trying to fix whatever's going on with the pizzaplex to stop this for good is the old Afton house, which would be why he can talk to the intercom in the elevator because he's in the building connected to that elevator. It would explain why he's able to talk to a walkie-talkie because she just got close enough to that sister location bunker. Is that possible? Yes. Is it likely? No. Frankly, I think your idea that Gregory, Vanessa, and Freddy's head are just down there is more likely because it just has more precedence because it's an area that we know exists. We don't know where the elevator goes after Ruin, which I think is something really important to bring up. That elevator is connected to a battery in the bunker that we get to, and it's far away from where we started. I'd have to line it up on a 3D map to see what direction the cave goes in, because you do a lot of spiraling to get down from FNAF 6, but I'm fairly certain it goes away from the pizzaplex. So it is really interesting. It's really interesting. Where that elevator goes needs to be answered, and it's probably going to be answered in the game that comes out after Secret of the Mimic, whatever game continues this storyline. So I think Gregory is not down there, but instead of the FNAF 4 house, which is above the bunkers that have the new scooper in it. However, I think it's equally likely that he's just down there. The question then would be why? And how do we not run into him? But that's a whole nother series of questions. To get back to your question, it is possible that he's down there. I don't know if it's likely. But thank you for your question. And at least on the recording, we're past 45. I did take 2 breaks, so probably closer to 40. But whatever, it's good enough. If you want your question answered on the podcast, feel free to send it into Freddy Fazbear Pizza Podcast at gmail.com. That is in the description to copy and paste because it's a pain to type out. But until next time, as always, thank you for watching the Freddy Fazbear Pizza Podcast, where the pizza abilities are endless. We hope to enjoy your future patronage. Bye-bye for now.